At the beginning of the story, we see a police officer named Edward on duty. After finishing his lunch, he gets busy patrolling the road. At that moment, he sees a doll fall out of an unknown person's car. Edward picks up the doll and approaches the car. He sees a little girl and her mother who are shifting to another city. Edward returns the doll to the girl and tells them to travel safely. As he turns to leave, the girl playfully drops the doll again. When Edward bends down with a smile to pick it up, suddenly a truck crashes into the car. Edward tries his best to save both of them, but they die on the spot. This incident leaves a deep scar on Edward's life, resulting in a mental disorder. After undergoing treatment for a while, he decides to quit the police force. Even after a couple of months, Edward continues to experience hallucinations and must take medicine regularly. One day, when another officer visits Edward, he brings several important documents and a letter addressed to him. After the officer leaves, Edward sits down with the papers at noon and sees that the letter is from his ex-girlfriend Willow. They broke up several years ago and hadn't spoken since. That's why the letter surprises Edward. In the letter, Willow writes that her daughter Rowan has been missing for the past 2 weeks. Willow lives on a small island named Samjail, where she was born and raised. Samjail is a private island located in the Pacific Northwest, far from the city, and is home to a community of farmers. It's impossible for little Rowan to escape from there on her own, and even the local community is not helping with the matter. That's why Willow needs Edward's help. Being a police officer, he cannot refuse the request. However, what's strange is that Samjail is such a private island that not only do outsiders rarely visit, but there's also no mobile network available there. Despite knowing everything, Edward's friends warn him not to go, but Edward decides to leave for Samjail, putting all past memories behind. On the way, while on a boat, he sees a little girl and begins to hallucinate about the accident again. He takes his medicine to calm himself down. After reaching a certain point, when no one agrees to take him to the island, Edward meets an old man named Miller, who supplies various essential goods to Samjail. When Edward asks him to take him there, Miller initially refuses, saying that the people of Samjail do not welcome strangers. But after Edward offers him a good amount of money, Miller reluctantly agrees and secretly drops him off a bit away from the main part of Samjail. After crossing through the jungle and heading deeper inside, Edward meets a few residents of the island. As soon as they see him, they express displeasure. Edward tells them that he is a police officer and was called to the island to investigate a missing child. However, an elderly woman dismisses his explanation and tells him to get permission from Sister Samjail. When Edward shows them a photo of Rowan and asks questions, they pretend not to recognize her and turn their faces away, which seems quite suspicious to Edward. But when he mentions the mother's name, they tell him that someone named Sister Willow lives in the meeting house, but the girl in the photo is not her daughter. Later, Edward arrives at a hotel to stay for a few days. The owner of the hotel is a woman named Sister Pitch. It's worth noting that most of the hotel residents are women, and the few men present are mostly silent observers. At that moment, Willow arrives and shows Edward to his room. Before going to the room, Edward tells everyone the reason for his visit, but they all seem indifferent about Rowan. However, when a bee sits on the table and Edward kills it with a glass, Pitch reacts so intensely that Edward is left surprised. In the room, Willow has left a note for Edward. It says to meet her alone by the bridge in an hour. Edward meets Willow there as instructed and asks her to explain everything from the beginning. Why did she suddenly leave him and come here? Edward didn't even know he had a daughter. Willow gives very vague answers to his questions. For example, instead of asking Rowan's father for help, why did she call Edward? Is it just because she trusts him? Not getting a proper answer, Edward doesn't push her too hard. Willow says that no one wants to believe Rowan is missing, but she believes Rowan is still here on the island. When Edward asks more questions, Willow sees something and quickly runs away. In the evening, after returning to his room and checking his bag, Edward is shocked to find that a book titled Everything is Okay is missing, which means someone had opened his bag. When Edward goes to ask about it, he overhears Pitch telling 2 blind twin women to prepare for the upcoming festival in 2 days. Edward doesn't make much of it and avoids saying anything. In the middle of the night, he wakes up from a nightmare and suddenly hears the sound of a child crying. He sees a little girl wearing a dress just like Rowan's running into the forest. Edward chases her breathlessly and follows her into a farmhouse. There, Edward doesn't find Rowan. Perhaps it was just another hallucination. During breakfast, Edward asks for some honey since everywhere he looks, he sees beekeeping going on. But Sister Honey ignores his request and walks away. Edward's attention then goes to the pictures of the festival hanging on the wall. In each frame from every year, there's a photo of a little girl, except for the most recent year, which is missing. When Edward asks Pitch about it, She tells him that these are photos from the Harvest Festival, celebrated every year on the last day of spring. Not only that, but a fertility festival is also held here. When Edward asks about the missing frame from last year, Pitch says it was burned and destroyed last night, so it's been sent to be repaired. Edward also notices that most of the work here is done by women. There are hardly any men around. Everyone seems to be hiding something from him. Edward then visits the children's school to meet Sister Rose. Strangely, only girls study there. Edward shows a photo of Rowan to Sister Rose and all the children and asks about her. But all of them react as if they've never seen or known Rowan. Edward grows more suspicious. He forcefully checks the student attendance register and is shocked to find Rowan's name there. It's understandable that Sister Rose might lie, but how are the children lying too? Rose claims that Rowan died in a fire, something Willow refuses to believe. Even the others tend to ignore the matter, saying that death is not the end. According to them, death is merely a special stage in which, after a certain time, the human soul leaves the body and merges with nature. Edward doesn't argue further. He learns from the locals about the island's church graveyard and goes there. Willow shows up and tells Edward that there's no use looking for Rowan there, because she's alive. That place hasn't been used as a graveyard for many years. As a result, the old tombs may now be filled with water. Everything happening with Rowan is part of a conspiracy. Because Willow is a free thinker and once tried to leave the island's queen, Sister Samjail, punished her by taking Rowan away. Now she plans to do something to Willow as well. Then Willow reveals another secret, that Rowan is not just anyone's child. She is the daughter of Edward and Willow. Hearing this, Edward is thrown into emotional conflict. Whom should he believe? If Rowan is indeed their child, why did Willow hide this from him all along? Later, Willow brings Edward to her house and explains things more clearly. On the day Rowan went missing, Willow had left her at home for just half an hour to go to the market. When she returned, Rowan was gone, and every single item Rowan used had also disappeared from the house, as if she had never existed. Willow has only one photo of Rowan, because the only person on the island who owns a camera is Dr. Moj, and he is the one who takes everyone's photos. Edward finds some cryptic drawings under Rowan's desk, with the words, "Help me," written on them, which increases their worry even more. Just then, they hear the sound of an approaching plane. It must be Miller. Since there's no mobile network, they think Miller might call for help using the plane's radio system. They quickly run toward the dock. But when they don't find Miller on the plane, they wait there for his return. After some time, Edward notices something floating under the dock. He quickly swims over and sees that it's Rowan. Just then, Edward jolts awake. He had dozed off while sitting. Realizing this, he looks toward the plane. Why hasn't anyone arrived yet? He swims to the plane and boards it, only to find the entire radio system broken. That means someone deliberately sabotaged it. As the mystery deepens, Edward goes straight to Dr. Moj. But Moj tries to ignore him too. Edward hides nearby, waiting for Moj to leave his house. When Moj eventually leaves with a few sisters, Edward sneaks into his house and finds a book on ancient rituals. It mentions that at the beginning of every year, during the fertility festival to ensure a good harvest, a young girl is sacrificed through a special fire ritual. Reading this, Edward remembers what Sister Rose had said about Rowan. He also finds a photo of Rowan in Dr. Moj's house, which deepens his suspicion even further. Edward immediately confronts Willow and asks her why she hid the truth about Rowan being part of a ritual from the very beginning. But caught in a web of words and unable to give any clear answer, Willow gets emotional. Seeing that, Edward doesn't press further. With no one else to turn to, he decides to meet Sister Samjail. But the problem arises from the bees being raised around Samjail's house. Since Edward is allergic, what had to happen? When he regains consciousness, he finds himself lying inside Sister Samjail's house, with Dr. Moj sitting beside him. Pulling himself together, Edward steps outside to meet Sister Samjail. She appears to be calm and composed. Edward immediately requests permission to dig up Rowan's grave so he can perform an autopsy and find out the real cause of death. But Sister Samjail doesn't seem particularly concerned about it. Annoyed, Edward asks her about the island itself. Samjail explains that everyone on the island worships a goddess, and that the sisters, including herself, are considered messengers of that goddess. She reveals that everyone on Samjail Island follows paganism. The word pagan comes from the Latin word paganus, meaning rural people or villagers. Paganism is an ancient belief system that existed across much of Europe before Christianity. Many consider it an earth-based religion or a form of nature spirituality because its followers worship the divine in the elements of nature. Sister Samjail explains that during the Salem witch trials, when women were being killed on suspicion of witchcraft, their ancestors escaped and discovered this island around 1850. Since then, a matriarchal society of witches has continued here, where men are only used for reproduction. After hearing all this, Edward realizes the level of deception at play on the island. Without wasting more time, he sets out to uncover the truth. As night falls, Edward sneaks into the island's old graveyard. When he digs up Rowan's grave, he finds nothing but a burnt doll. That confirms it. Rowan is still alive and is being hidden by the others. Just then, he hears the sound of a child crying, coming from beneath the underground burial site. Edward sees a torn piece of Rowan's sweater and climbs down into the water. Finding nothing, he turns to leave, only to discover that someone has blocked the exit. Helpless and unable to get out, Edward spends the entire night in the water. Fortunately, in the morning, Willow comes searching and rescues him. Edward warns Willow to stay alert and heads straight to Sister Samjail's house. But there, several disturbing things throw him into deeper worry, like seeing Samjail's husband and a woman trapped in an upstairs room along with a swarm of bees. Edward leaves the house and on the road sees Sister Rose wearing a mask. Shocked, he asks about it, and she replies that they're preparing for the festival, meaning something is surely going to happen to Rowan that day. Determined to save her before it's too late, Edward snatches a bicycle from Rose and rushes to the hotel. There, he asks for help from the few men present, but no one dares to step forward out of fear. Desperate, Edward starts searching house to house for Rowan, but has no luck. Even his bicycle is stolen by someone taking advantage of the chaos. Eventually, Edward reaches the edge of the dock and sees Miller's dead body wedged between the rocks, brutally murdered. Left with no option, Edward returns to the hotel, knocks Sister Pitch unconscious, and wears her costume to secretly join the ritual, hoping to find Rowan there. The entire island, dressed in costumes and masks, is marching in celebration. The most shocking part? Willow is participating too. After walking deep into the forest, they arrive at a certain location where Edward sees Rowan tied to a large tree. Without wasting a second, he rescues her and runs toward the dock. By then, on Sister Samjail's orders, the others start chasing him. While hiding behind a tree to avoid them, Rowan suddenly breaks free from Edward's grasp and runs deeper into the forest. Edward, forgetting everything, runs after her to save her. But after passing through the forest path, Rowan reaches an open field and runs toward Sister Samjail and her mother Willow, who are standing on the other side. Edward is stunned. He can't understand what just happened. Sister Samjail smiles and says, "Thank you, Mr. Edward, for coming here willingly. You have fulfilled the tradition of the Wicker Man." And with that, the real mystery is revealed. Rowan was never actually missing. The entire event was part of a grand plan. Because the harvest had failed the previous year, they needed to satisfy their goddess by offering someone with a blood connection. And for that, they used Willow. From the very beginning, Willow had maintained a false relationship with Edward. Her real intention was that if she ever had a daughter, she would bring her back to the island, to continue their lineage. Willow was none other than the daughter of Sister Samjail. When they learned that a major sacrifice was needed, they all planned and sent the letter to Edward. They knew he would come running at Willow's call, and that's exactly what happened. From the very first day Edward arrived, the entire island community staged events to trap him further into their web. At that moment, Edward pulls out his gun and fires, but it doesn't work. Willow had already removed the bullets long ago. Before he can understand what's happening, everyone jumps on him. They tie him up in a sack and bring him to a massive bamboo wicker man statue, already filled with animals. Edward is tied with ropes and lifted high up into it. A burning torch is handed to Rowan. Edward screams, begging Rowan not to set it on fire. He keeps saying, "I'm your father." But it's no use. Slowly, the fire spreads. As Edward burns, the crowd erupts in joyous chants. Edward never realized when the hunter became the hunted on this island. 6 months pass. In a hotel somewhere in the city, we see Willow and Honey again, already searching for a new victim. And with that, the Wicker Man story comes to an end.